right, welcome back, listener, to Lost and Searching. I'm your host, Seven, and today we're chatting to Sophia, a youth and mental health advocate and a speaker. She very honestly and openly shares her journey and story of a very challenging life and experience with mental illness and mental health, and we reflect on some philosophical perspectives of what it means as a result to show up as your best self in this world, if it's okay to deal with the things you don't want to deal with, if it's okay to just acknowledge that sometimes shit things are kind of shit, what it means to be on your personal development journey, how we can practically grow through those challenges and a lot more. And I am aware, when I speak to people that are what I would call maybe leadership adjacent, where it's more about understanding people and the self-leader as opposed to something that looks like leadership physically or superficially, that the conversation tends to get a little bit more personal, a little bit deeper on the philosophical and the human and the psychological and sometimes even spiritual level. And I do think that's what it's about. We're all people who show up as leaders in places as opposed to people in leadership positions, and definitely not that title. So more of this is what you can expect, and I do hope you enjoy. Hey everyone, a really quick note on this episode. I made a little mistake when starting recording, and it meant that for the first about 1/3 of the episode, the audio quality isn't very good. I did my best to clean it up for you so that you can still hear it, but about 1/3 of the way in it gets a lot better, so hopefully you stick through it. I do apologize every time something like this happens. I use it as a chance to test and learn to make sure it doesn't happen again, and that I continue to improve quality. So thank you very much for sticking with it. I appreciate you. Let's get into the episode. Have you heard this saying before? Matter observed is matter changed. So as soon as a camera starts rolling, people act differently. We've observed this in animals a lot. We've observed this in animals. So
that's really interesting.
I remember seeing this clip of like a hidden camera. This is just like one of these random videos you see when you're scrolling through whatever. And someone hid a camera like in some bushes in a forest.
Yeah.
And it was like a deer and like a predator, so like a lion or something like that. And they're just like walking along like this together, like some kind of Disney show. Yeah, this. And it's like, is that because we observed it, or is that because we never observe it? Because as soon as we see it, they act differently.
That's so cool.
And philosophically, you can't know.
That's true.
It's like the theory of like, if the tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? And the answer is like, no, because there's no one to observe it. But theoretically, something must be observed, like a bug or something. And you don't know, because you don't...
This is...
mind blown.
Whoa, yeah.
I know, crazy.
For real.
All of this to say, we're being recorded. So, and what I've noticed is actually sometimes I'll have little conversations before cameras start rolling, and then as soon as cameras roll, things change. And on a very practical level, it's because we know we're now being recorded, so we act differently, even if it's subconscious. Good, well,
amazing.
My first question for you is, what's your story?
Ooh.
And you're not allowed to use the word wanky, as you described it.
Good. That's probably a good thing. Okay, so I don't really want to talk about like deep mental health stuff, so I'm just gonna skim over it so that I can read the right.
Whatever you're happy to talk
Okay.
about, yeah.
So I have struggled with my mental health for like since I was 10, 11, I think. And it's been a really complicated journey. And I essentially wasn't really listened to by any of the services that were supposed to look out for me or protect me. And I got used to hiding it. So it became this like big secret that I was so anxious, that I was self-harming, that I was so depressed. It was like this huge secret. Eventually I like physically couldn't hide and emotionally couldn't hide it anymore. And I tried to take my own life, which landed me in hospital. And then that's kind of when the floodgates opened and everything came out, and I just couldn't hide anything anymore. And they were like, okay, you're really unwell. Who's your community caseworker? And I was like, I don't have one of those. They were like, okay, well, which service are you with in the community? I'm not with anything in the community. I'm just on my own. And that's how it felt as well. So then alarm bells started ringing, and basically everyone scrambled to kind of get some sort of plan in place for me, which meant that I was sent to an inpatient psychiatric hospital, which I needed. I didn't realise how badly I needed to be there, because I don't think I realised how unwell I was. I was still kind of just putting it this front and being like, no, I'm totally fine.
I mean, at that age, how could you have known?
That's true. Like I was 15, and it felt like my world had ended at 15. I didn't see anything beyond that, like genuinely at all. So I think the gravity of the situation wasn't really apparent because my whole being was consumed with just not being, like not being able to handle stuff anymore, not, and yeah. So I ended up in hospital. It was there that I got my diagnoses, official diagnoses. So I was diagnosed with an eating disorder, with severe depression and anxiety. And yeah, I found myself stuck there for a while. And I initially resisted all treatment and all attempts to help me. I was like, this is stupid. I'm never going to get better. You people can't help me. Leave me alone or let me go.
It was a mental resistance, and just you were they try like how does that manifest? Like were they trying to do certain things and help you with certain things, and you said no? Like how did that come from?
So I was just done. Like I think in notes they write something like, oh, she's like resistant to treatment, or like she won't engage in therapy or in like, I don't know, I just used to like hide myself away in my room. I didn't want to talk to any of the other patients. Like I just completely was like, I'm done, leave me alone. And then I think like after a month or two, something must have changed, and the whole time period is still quite blurry. Like it's still quite fuzzy around the edges, and I can't like there's a few random details that really stick out to me really vividly, and then the more of the traumatic things that I saw and heard, like I know are there, but I just like my brain is, I guess, protecting me from it. And yeah, I think something just changed, something clicked, and I thought, wow, I've always been really stubborn, and I think I thought, well, if I'm going to be here, if they're not going to let me go, or they're not going to let me do what I want to do, which was essentially in my life, if they're not going to leave me alone, then I might as well play the game. And I think initially that's what I was, like, again, pretending I'm fine, convincing everyone that like everything's fine and I'm okay and I'm getting better, and like almost pretending to basically fake it till you make it. But in the best way, because something did genuinely click and I was like, okay, maybe this doesn't have to be my life. Maybe there is more to life than being stuck in hospital and being in this kind of no man's land of not being allowed out or not being allowed to do what you want versus refusing to get better and things like that. Maybe there's a way through. So it was tough, and it wasn't just like one day I had this thought and then it was all amazing afterwards. It actually got worse, a lot worse afterwards. Really, really difficult, and kind of just fighting against your own brain is the hardest and scariest thing. And I think a lot of people underestimate, especially people who haven't struggled with mental illness before or suicidal thoughts before, you can underestimate how awful it is. Yeah, but I decided to give it a go, give myself another go. and slowly started participating in therapy, talking to people, listening, and yeah, things very slowly, very slightly started to improve. Kind of like, it was like, I know that, do you know, that's not it. Do you like, I guess like a cloud, or like a very like heavy, like really dark, and like, and then it just felt like my entire world was just like had collapsed in on me, and then very slowly it started expanding again, and I realized that there was more stuff out there for me, and that wasn't the end of my story, so to speak. Yeah, and then I guess those experiences led me to talk about my story, to advocate for other young people in similar situations to what I was in, to try and improve mental health services for young people. And also more generally, I mean, it started off like that, and then more generally it became more about youth voice in spaces where young people are often dismissed or belittled. So politics, education, you might think, oh yeah, education is for young people, like, but
We'll get into
it's a lot of stuff. But yeah, politics, education, global affairs, I don't know, like on every level, young people can be engaged in so many different ways. And I decided that I wanted to try and make that happen.
That narrative description of collapse and expanse is really interesting to me, because so much of what we can observe in the universe seems to mirror what's the nature of the universe. So when you say collapse and expanse, I'm immediately thinking like the Big Bang and the expanse and collapse of the universe. Like we know now that we're actually, the universe isn't expanding anymore. We think there's a theory it's not expanding anymore. It's actually going back towards like source energy, obviously over bajillions of years, but we can reflect that when something, when we feel as though we've collapsed, but guess what? The cycle starts anew and starts to re-expand again. But it's a little bit like you've ever like looked really closely at like a walnut? It looks like the half of grain.
Yes, sorry, I'm thinking of an acorn. Yes, a walnut. Yes, it looks like a grain.
It looks like a mini brain or like a mini like pair of lungs at some point. Like the universe has all these little really beautiful mirrorings. It's like if you've ever seen a picture of like an iris really zoomed in, it looks like the space. It looks like space.
It's so cool.
And so anyway, the reason I think these reflections are really interesting is because it shows, it's to me, it's a really significant reflection of often what's happening within us is a reflection of something that we actually see as being really beautiful about the universe. When you're in that moment, it feels, of course, really heavy and really challenging. But now, as an adult, looking back on it, reflecting on these things, I'm sure there are elements you can appreciate.
Yeah, it's interesting because it taught me a lot about myself, about the world, about what I can go through and come out the other side of. But it also makes me a little bit angry because I shouldn't have had to go through all of that. The services should have been, I'm gonna sneeze. Sorry, the services should have been there to.
Do you need a tissue?
No, I'm okay. I don't know why it keeps like coming. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so the service, it does make me angry because the services should have been there when I needed them and not when I reached crisis. And they weren't. So yeah, it's mixed feelings definitely.
Absolutely. That's probably what gives you the energy to do something about it now.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's, I guess, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, part of it is there is a selfish element to it, and I think a lot of people don't think about this. A lot of the work that I do is it empowers me And I hope that it empowers other people. It empowers me to carry on doing what I'm doing, to keep going forward in my recovery. And I see my recovery as a journey. It's not a destination. I genuinely don't think I will ever be recovered. Like, I don't think that's a state that exists. I think it's a journey, and that'll look different at different points in my life. But I think I have to acknowledge the joy and the energy that it gives me to be able to meet so many amazing people, amazing young people, people who are in the same space as me, who think the same, but also challenge me. I get a lot from that. So I think it would be unfair of me to not talk about that element too.
What is going through this journey taught you upon reflection about life? What are your biggest takeaways?
That's a good question.
Because I know, and I'll color why I asked
Okay.
you, though, because it's really, I think it's so important to reflect on, as challenging as what some of us go through is, it is through that adversity that we are shaped. We are born in the fires of adversity. You would not be everything you are now if not for those challenges, and you would not be able to give as much as you can give if not for overcoming what you have overcome to the extent that you have. I love that you describe it as a journey, because as opposed to a destination, because I don't really believe we reach destinations, and I think what we do, they're really anticlimactic.
Yeah.
Because like the only real destination we reach is like the end of our lives, you know, it's the end of the road. I have a number of rules for my life, and one of them is the journey is the destination. So show up living that journey every day. Be present in that journey, because the whole point of life, of the game, as you I think very rightly put it, is to just keep playing. The point of the game is to keep playing and play the best you can. That means enjoying it and learning from it. And if we weren't shaped by the adversity we go through, we wouldn't be able to give as much as we can, because we wouldn't have learned the things we've learned, right? You recognize a lot of people have underestimated the challenge, the impact it's had on you and on other people that go through that. And you can do that because you've been through some of it yourself. You've seen firsthand, and through that, we have the ability to gain empathy for it.
Yeah, I do agree with what you're saying. I think there's some really important points in there. Sometimes it is just really rubbish. Sometimes there doesn't have to be a bigger lesson or a bigger meaning. Sometimes awful things happen, and that's just the way life goes. And I think it's important to acknowledge that you don't have to kind of find a deeper meaning in everything. You can, if that's where you're led, and like where you feel, if that's what you feel you need, then that's great. But I think it's also sometimes really important to acknowledge that awful things happen to people, and it's not fair. And we are allowed to be angry about it without being like, oh, it like, I don't know, it's the whole grow through what you go through.
Toxic positivity. Yes.
It doesn't always have to be like that. We're allowed to be angry at the cards that we've been dealt. But there was something else that you said that.
So all of this leads me to the question, which is, what do you feel you have learned, right? Some of it might have just, been shit, and you're right, like sometimes things are just shit. As a result, I don't think you can deny that as a result, you do know so much more, you can give so much more. So what is it you feel like you've learned and really taken and grown through despite the ironic way?
Yeah. Okay, I think it's a really hard, I think it's also similar to along the lines of like when people say, "Oh, would you change what happened?" Because if I'm completely honest, probably. If I could have gotten the help that I needed when I needed it, my life would look very different. It wouldn't necessarily be better, but it would be very different. And I wouldn't have necessarily experienced all of the pain that mental illness caused me, all of the time and experiences and opportunities that it took from me. But then I wouldn't be who I am without it. It's a big part of me. I identify as being mentally ill. That's okay to say that it's a part of me. It's not all of me, but it has mental illness has such an impact, and mental illness has had such an impact on my life that it deserves to be, no, that's not what I want to say. It's had such an impact on my life that I deserve to acknowledge the effect that it's had on me without making it all that I am.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way of putting it.
Took me a while.
Identity is interesting because we get really, I do think we can get a little bit attached to like, this is who I am as a result. Like, what if those things didn't happen? And then that's when you go down the rabbit hole. I think it's a little bit of rabbit, not that it's bad if it serves that person, but you know, I wouldn't change this awful thing that happened because, you know, as a result, I wouldn't be doing X, Y, and Z nowadays or whatever. And again, if that's what's useful for you, great. I do think that can create a lot of value for a lot of people and has done for me. But I was recently listening to Trevor Noah talk about this. He made a very good like counter argument of like, if this shitty thing shouldn't have happened, this shouldn't have happened, like period. And it became really inspiring to hear people in like the personal growth, the growth of personal development space be like, I wouldn't change all these bad things that happened to me. And it's like, but if you acknowledge that you don't want them to happen to others, you have to acknowledge that they shouldn't have happened to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If I could, and yeah, if I could kind of stop it happening to me and gone through a normal
Whatever normal
means. Yeah. But like just not being severely mentally ill, and just having that teenage and early adulthood and not having the trauma and the pain that I've been through, I genuinely don't know how people can say, oh no, I'm glad, I'm like, I wouldn't change it, because oh my god, I would. It's, as well as giving me so much, and I'm so lucky to the opportunities that I have had through my experiences, it also took so much away from me, especially in those formative years where it's like all these milestones and all these things that you're supposed to be doing. Like everyone talks about the summer of 2016 as being like the summer. I'm pretty sure it was like amazing weather. The football was on. I think that was the summer of 2016. Like it was the World Cup.
I'm the wrong person to ask. Okay.
I'm pretty sure there was a few people talking about like, oh, that was such a good summer, and like all the songs were so good, and like that's the summer I spent in hospital. So yeah, certain things like that just really make me think that like honestly, yeah, I would change it.
Yeah, but how has that changed your outlook on life now? Now, as you describe it, going through the journey of recovery, doing more work in the space as well, using some of what you've learned to do your best to help others. Yeah, how do you think these experiences have changed your outlook on life and what it means to move through life? What is life? Color your perspective for us. As you say, people often don't understand if they haven't been through it.
I think your health and well-being is the most important thing, above almost anything else. And I know a lot of things are linked into that, like family and friends and connections and social life and things like that. But for me, that has become a number one priority, higher than education or getting a good job or earning loads of money. That's my number one priority. And I think I have never put so much much importance on being well, mentally and physically. I think as humans, we're so much stronger than we think we are. And it's until you're in these awful, really trying, testing conditions that shake the very foundation of who you are, because that's what mental illness did to me. I didn't know who I was without it. Until you're in those situations and until you come through the other side of them and you can look back and be like, wow, I did that. I survived through that. It doesn't matter how you survived, what surviving looked like to you or what that meant for you. But being able to say, I got through that is a huge achievement. And also being able to say, and I will continue to get through it, whatever it may be, whatever will happen in the future. I know that, or I have faith in myself that I will do the best that I can to trust in myself and trust in my ability to keep going. Yeah, I think it really teaches you how resilient people are. Yes, on a personal level as well, I think I have like major imposter syndrome, and I think it's a reminder that I deserve to be in the spaces that I'm in because I fought to be in them. I fought my own mind and my body at times. I fought healthcare professionals and loads of people, sometimes even my own parents, to be in the spaces that I was and am. And I deserve to be there because of that.
The guest I was just chatting to, we started talking about this really ironic thing we've noticed, that often we are in wars for peace. You think, like, in a way that sounds really obvious, right? It's like, what do you want at the end of a war that's like a battle? So you want peace. But you wouldn't go to war when there was already peace to gain peace. But actually, that is what we're usually doing. It's like any system you want to change, if it's everything from healthcare systems to the way we treat each other, to justice, to actual wars. Sometimes we are fighting a war for peace, really ironically. It's like, why don't we just all put our weapons down?
Literally.
But actually, it's when it's within, or it's within a system, that's often not how it works, right? She used the example of a legal battle. It's like, that's a war. So that it can be over. We still choose to go to court. It's like, this is often how it is. And I think it's most interesting is that's happening within our own mind.
The phrase kind of fight for justice popped up into my head. Justice shouldn't be something that we have to fight for, I don't think.
If it was just, it would just be just. So this becomes a question then about human perception.
Yeah.
Right? What are we seeing as, viewing as, labeling as the thing? So what are we labeling as healthy and unhealthy? What are we labeling as just? How much of it is fact and how much is narrative that we create? And I think this is the problem, is you and I could look at a set of things and go, it just is a fact that those things are just and those things are unjust. And we're more likely to agree because of our backgrounds or belief systems or generation, right, like age group. And you speak to someone else with a different perspective, and to them it isn't fact. Often anything that isn't a fact is an opinion. And so even if we think it's fact, if we can't prove it as a fact, it's a default an opinion. So I don't know. I guess it's a question, like from your perspective, having in your words fought so many battles, still fighting some of these battles, both internally but also to communicate these with other people. How have you done that effectively? What have you noticed has worked when really its opinion is sometimes, it isn't always, there's a lot of stats actually on mental health related stuff, but sometimes it's opinion versus opinion, and that can just go into echo chambers?
Yeah, so I think you make a really good point about echo chambers. I, for a long time, was very uncomfortable with being challenged. I didn't like surrounding myself with people who would just agree with me or like nod and like be like, yes, that's right, that's exactly what I think. I've learned that some of my best ideas and most genuine and authentic interactions come from when I'm being challenged. And I feel like as a society, not as a generation, this isn't a generational thing, this is a societal thing. As a society, we have forgotten how to disagree respectfully.
That is such an interesting point.
I really strongly believe this because there's so much going on about like cancel culture and like you can't have this opinion and like this is wrong, and it's so difficult. It's such a difficult ground to tread because you can like there are some. I think you have to work out what your non-negotiables are, what are facts for you, and what your values are and what you will stand by. But also just being like, okay, we have different values and different opinions on certain things, and that's okay. Like, my job isn't to change your mind. And I will, if I tried to do that with every single person I came across, I would burn out so quickly.
Yeah, it's physically impossible.
You just have to be like, you know what? Okay, this will take too much energy from me. And that's not to say don't challenge people and don't engage in these conversations, because I think these conversations are really important, but it's about this respectful disagreement, I think, which is what we're missing. And there's a very fine line when it comes to kind of humanitarian issues and issues of people's existence being their authentic selves. Those, for me, are my non-negotiables.
See, this is where ADHD is really useful, actually. Everything is a superpower. Sorry, go on.
But yeah, I want to go back to what you just said about everything being a superpower.
Okay, this is meant to be. Go, tell me.
I don't necessarily agree.
Yeah.
I think that when it comes to these conditions and illnesses and whatever it is that you live with, I think it goes back to that point of just being like, it's okay to say that it's really shit. And it's okay to be like, actually, sometimes this doesn't improve my life at all. It makes my life so much harder. And sometimes it does. Like, if I need to be really focused for something, great. My ADHD brain will kick in, or like, you know, like little things like this. But also, it is debilitating, and two things can be true at the same time. And I spoke about this at another event that I was doing, that I think it's important to acknowledge that, like, the power of the word and that two things can be true at the same time. So ADHD can be debilitating and frustrating, and it can negatively impact someone's life so severely. And it also has these little glimmers where you're like, oh, my brain works in this way and this makes sense to me because this is my brain. This is how I think. This is how I see things. This is how I perceive the world. And in certain scenarios, in certain situations, that works and that's perfect and that's great. And those two things can be true at the same time.
I actually saw that video.
Oh, you did?
I did see the video. I know, but I love it because, so a little bit of contextual background about myself. I'm trained in neurolinguistic programming, NLP.
What does that mean?
Basically, is the long-winded semi-clinical version or like word for hypnosis. And it's the understanding that we can change and program and reprogram the brain using language. If the brain is essentially this big cluster of neurons that communicate with each other via neural pathways, which neurons are activated and how depends on what pathway they're using.
Okay.
And it will use the path of least resistance. So imagine you were going down like tunnel A in your like, I don't know, some water was flowing down pipe A or pipe B, and pipe A was huge and pipe B was really thin. Almost all the water would go down pipe A. Our brains are a little bit like that, where whatever pathways we use the most are the ones that it will continue to use. It's basically habits. It's basically habit forming within the brain.
Yeah.
Now, there are little tricks we can use via brute difference to, or as opposed to just like brute forcing using different neural pathways by trying to do different things. There are little linguistic tools we can use to change how the brain picks up information. So what you said about and, we have a few examples of these, and the difference between using and or but in a sentence is one of the most powerful examples. When you use, if I were to say, you know, this report was really great that you created, but it needed to change this, 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 and this.
Yeah.
To the brain, it completely cuts out the first bit. It doesn't hear it.
Yeah,
Quite literally,
exactly,
doesn't
yeah.
hear it. It's so to the brain, it's as if that person walked up to you, grabbed you out of the blue, and went, "Hey, your report needs to change all these things. Bye," and just leaves. It's not a conversation. It's a telling you that if this is how you pick it up, that it just wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And that can be really unhelpful. In fact, we know it's unhelpful. Yeah. If you wanted to do it more helpfully, you could say the exact same sentence and just change the word but for the word and. And suddenly the brain, something about the way it works, something maybe about the English language and the way this language works, it actually hears the first half of that sentence, which is the positive. And we know that when the brain frames something in the positive, it can take it away more constructively, regardless of the detail given in that sentence. There are loads of examples I could go into, but the one you bring up is so powerful because it's one of the simplest things that we can do. I catch myself all the time saying something like negative about myself, but it isn't actually, it's not that it's negative traditionally, it's that I've said, you know, this, and this happened, but, and I go, sorry, I don't mean but, I mean and I have to stop myself.
I also consciously do it now. Like I consciously make that decision to use the word or make the choice to use the word and if I don't, I will go back and correct myself. And I think the point that you make on like habits is super important. So I guess there's 2 points here. So the first is the power of the word and. I learned in DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, literally just means that two things can be true at the same time. Multiple things can be true at the same time.
So interesting.
Which and I've always said it kind of rewired my brain, but now you've just explained it to me. It literally did rewire my brain.
Yeah.
I hated it when I first started it. I hated it. So
DBT generally. Okay.
Yeah, the therapy. So it was 3 hours of group work. We would get homework and we would get 1 hour of individual therapy.
Okay. How often? A week?
Every week.
Okay.
So this is
3 hours of homework. Makes it sound like a chore.
Honestly, they would be like, okay, for next session, you need to like fill out these worksheets. And I was like, are you having a laugh?
I'm not 12 anymore.
There's no way I'm doing that. Like, absolutely not.
I think I've been given a worksheet since I was literally like 12. Anyway.
Honestly, I went through so many cycles of it, and I was so resistant to it at first, like I mentioned before, and I just refused to give it a go. And then I think it just kind of wore me down. I think they were like, we'll just keep sticking her in these cycles of DBT until something clicks. I did so much DBT, I could probably teach the module myself. But it did rewire my brain. It gave me a whole different way of thinking about things, about facts, but also about my own facts, my own realities, things that were true for me and my experiences that weren't necessarily true for other people or from someone else's perspective. And then the second thing that you mentioned about habits, and it's a conversation that I'm still having with myself, because on one hand, I want to live every day the best that I can live and like be the best version of myself that I can be, and kind of be this like little Pilates girly who wakes up at 5 a.m. and like does everything and it's like perfect and all of this stuff. I want to be her.
I love how the label for that is Pilates girly. That's fantastic.
And honestly, no hate to anyone who does Pilates, because I love Pilates. I think it's great.
Nice.
It's tough, but it's good. And at the same time, I want to reject all of this wellness culture and this idea that we're not enough as we are, that we should constantly be striving to be better and to improve ourselves, and that by constantly trying to improve ourselves, the question is, are we losing sight of where we are now, all that we've achieved now, and who we are now in our imperfect, flawed forms? And that, in a way, that's also pretty perfect.
This is really interesting. And this is really interesting timing for me as well, because my first kind of 20 or so episodes of this show, I'm trying to figure out exactly what I want the show's like brand, like the personal brand, but for the show, and even my personal brand to be. And where I'm kind of landing is helping people discover their strongest, wisest, best self. And understanding that I think we all have an inner leader that we just don't let come out sometimes, that we need to work on and develop. And there is a big, call it an industry that is personal development, which sounds conflicting with what you just said. But at the same time, I personally completely believe that we are as perfect as we can be, which is a very specific sentence on purpose for a couple of reasons. One, because perfection doesn't exist. And number two, because the now is the only thing we have. So if the now is all that is, yet we can also strive to be our greatest, strongest, wisest self, like, I guess, how do we square this circle? Because in other words, I think both are correct, but there is a thoughts or there's a circle to square here somehow.
I'm also still trying to figure it out. I'm at the point where like those two things are true for me. That this is the most perfect I have ever been, and perfect I have ever been. This is the best, most authentic state of my being that I have been in my life, because it's today. And I can still want to do things to, I don't know, like improve my quality of life, make things easier for myself, learn more things, meet more people. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean that I'm not happy with who I am now.
Yes.
And where I'm at now. So it's a really interesting space, I think. There's a lot of toxic stuff going around. There's also a lot of really important stuff, meaningful stuff going around. But it's something that I'm also still trying to figure out. Like, where do I stand on this whole like wellness industry versus self-improvement versus be who you are in the moment thing?
Can I be really annoying
Yeah.
and offer a little challenge, which is exactly what we were just saying about changing the verses to an and.
Did I say but?
You didn't say but, you said verses. And I wonder if it's the same thing. Yeah. I wonder if it's the same thing or very similar. Like, we can have personal development while still loving who we are now.
Yeah.
There is nothing in the universe that isn't flawed, that isn't also perfect. Therefore, we are perfect as we are now, yet we can also develop into a greatest self that we are on the journey of becoming.
Yeah.
And it's not an either or, it's an and. It's just how do we square the circle of understanding that conceptually.
Yeah. And I guess it's like a lot of the people assume that like if you go to the gym, you hate your body.
Yeah, like, exactly. And really, is it the reframe? So a big part of NLP is what we call reframes. So taking exactly what you think the thing is and going, actually the perspective's just a little bit different. So your brain takes it differently. So the reframe on that would be, I'm going to the gym because I love my body and I want to give it as much as I possibly can.
Yes, and I think that mindset has fundamentally changed the way I think about things. It doesn't always work. In the example for like I'm about to give, things like I deserve to live in a clean house. I deserve to sleep in a clean room. I deserve to, I don't know, have fresh air and go into nature, and I deserve to not have to worry about my work by doing it now so that I don't worry about it later. And that doesn't always work. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I actually just can't be asked to clean my room. I don't care if I deserve it or not. Like, I just, no. But that's reframed a lot of the things. Instead of like, oh, I have to do this, like, I have to do this, I have to do that. It's sometimes it can be, I get to do this and I get to do that. And I think there's a really important nuance to caveat that with here. And that's with living with chronic illness, whatever that looks like for you, whether it's, or even being disabled, whether that's a mental illness, whether that's a physical disability, however that manifests for you, that so often these statements are so much more loaded when you have a disability. They're so much more complicated because you can have all the will in the world to be like, oh, I get to like tidy my room, amazing. But if you don't have the spoons, if you're so burnt out and so exhausted and you don't have the energy, you physically can't do it. If you're so scared and you have this huge mental block that you can't get out of your bed, then you can't clean your room, even though you do deserve to sleep in a clean room. So I think that's a really important nuance that a lot of people forget, that it's very easy to frame things in a more positive way. You have to think about the reality of people who live with chronic conditions and how their reality firstly can change from day to day and can change so drastically from day to day, and how it can also mean that their life is significantly affected by what they're going through. Yeah,
which is if that is their reality, then it is reality to them. And I wonder if this is the challenge we have supporting people just in all areas where we don't understand them, because our reality is reality to us.
That's exactly.
So like empathy is, when we say putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, really what we're saying is adopt someone else's reality.
Yeah.
Which is actually really challenging. And there's an added layer of complexity of what if your reality actually changes day to day. I totally get it. It creates a more complex challenge. Do you think, I guess I should say, what would you say to someone who's maybe in an influential position, if that's like a leadership role or a government role, or honestly, actually talking about influence, that could be anyone who has influence, that could be an influencer online. What would your message be to people who can influence or lead or in the right roles, to be able to adopt that perspective, to be able to understand and help others through a reality that isn't their reality, but is probably that person's reality? Or to understand that reality, what would you say to them?
Take a step back. Instead of jumping into trying to understand, take a step back and give that space to the person you're trying to understand. Let them show you and let them lead you rather than the other way around. So I've been in many conversations where people are like, oh yeah, we want to hear from young people, and like, you're the leaders in this conversation, but actually this is the agenda that we've written. And these are the things that we want to talk about. And this is how I'm going to steer the conversation. It doesn't work like that. You need to take a step back and be like, this is your space. You can do whatever you want with it. You can say whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. I believe in you and I'm empowering you to take this agency and have this agency. And I think only then can you, and I think there's a difference between, this is a big thing for me, the difference between empathy and sympathy. I can sympathize with a lot of people, but I can't, no, wait, have I got it right? Yeah, that I can't, like, I can, I don't know how to describe it. Kind of like that you can't actually experience what that person went through. And even in the mental health space, people like kind of come up to me and be like, oh yeah, you had an eating disorder too, so you obviously know what it's like. I don't know what your experience is, what your experience was like. I can make assumptions based on my own experience and based on other sources of information and things that I know, etc. But I can't ever experience what you went through.
Yes.
And that's okay. It's not about trying to do that. It's about acknowledging that you will always have that step back. I think the best way to describe this is, I talk to my mom a lot. I kind of said, oh, like, sometimes I talk about the things that I've been through. And she's like, oh, the things that we've been through. And on one hand, that's a very valid conversation, that the parents and carers of young people who are unwell, however that may look, have a very unique and very important perspective that's very valuable and should be given time to. At the same time, these people who have, for example, lost a sibling to suicide, or lost a loved one to suicide, or have lived with someone who has struggled with something, their experience is unique and valid in itself. And it cannot replace the lived experience of people who are the sibling, who are the loved one, who are that person. I think both are so important to have in the conversation, but you can't have one without the other. And I think a lot of people in the space need to firstly acknowledge their privilege, and secondly, to say, my experience, everything that I experience is valid and important, but it's different to what you have experienced. So there's room for both of us in this conversation.
There is your experience and there is your collective experience with your mom, and those are two things that happen at the same time.
Yeah.
They're both simultaneous different experiences.
Yeah.
They're both, and therefore both equally valid, but doesn't mean that they're not different.
Exactly. They're different, and that doesn't mean that one is more important or like one was worse than the other. Like, oh, I had a worse experience because
It doesn't
I
need to be
watched it.
about that.
or because I lived it. It doesn't have to be about that.
Yeah, we do fall into this habit of accidentally making things about ourselves. I say it that way because,
I also do it too.
you know, we all do it. We don't mean to, that's a generalization, but we don't mean to, you know, reduce someone else's like thing or like opinion. It just does so happen that sometimes we go, where do I fit into this conversation? When you don't know how to sit with space for someone else.
Yeah, because we want to relate. We want people to feel validated. We want them to feel like we understand. Sometimes it's okay not to understand. And just to, as you said, hold that space for them. And I think this is another thing that's really important. It's being able to also hold that space for yourself and being firstly comfortable with being on your own. I think it's such a life skill. And there was a time where I would probably physically run away from spending time just with myself. So I would constantly do something every second of every day to try and fill the time so I wouldn't have to sit with my thoughts. And I guess when people say, oh, you know, I kept myself busy, that's a coping mechanism of some ways. But how long can you be in that survival mode? I think it's really important to hold that space for yourself and to kind of sit with yourself and force yourself to be like, okay, just like silence. And it's so uncomfortable. And it's like one of my biggest things, which I still haven't managed to do. It's been on my list for like 2 years of things that I want to do. And it's to go to a restaurant and have a meal by myself. Like to go and be like, table for one, please. And to not sit there on my phone and like eating and scrolling because it feels like I'm doing something, but literally just to sit there and enjoy my meal. And of course, I've eaten on my own before with the TV on, with my phone in my hand, with music playing, with something else that I'm doing to distract myself rather than actually just watching other people and sitting with myself and having that time with myself. It's still something that is on my list of things. I've kind of done it as like a lunchtime thing.
Have you done it at home?
So I used to at uni sometimes. But again, there'd always be something like on, like I'd be watching something because, I don't want it to feel lonely. And I think that's why I want to do it in a restaurant because I want to be surrounded by everyone else and still have that bubble for me.
That's really interesting.
I don't know if I'm ever going to be, if I'm ever going to manage to do it because it's a big, like I've just even talking about it, like my brain is like going into overdrive, but it's something that I would really like to do one day.
Yeah. The thing about, again, talking about language is if you say it's something I know I'm going to do one day, I'm just not sure when I'm ready, far more powerful. And as a result, you are more likely to do it. I think you'll definitely do it. And the reason I ask is if you've ever done it at home is because sometimes these little micro steps help.
Yeah.
I used to, you know how some people go to the movies on their own? I used to be like, I can't imagine that. That just sounds wild to me. Now I still wouldn't really do it for myself, but I can understand it. That's just 'cause I don't care much about movies, but like I understand it much better now. Because there's these little, what I would call like micro meditation moments.
Yeah.
So
I like that.
where it is exactly as you describe. It's just like, I don't need to be doing anything. Even if it's 60 seconds, it's like, I don't know if I would, like when I'm on the train, so on the train here to Birmingham to record these episodes today, it's like a 2.5 hour train ride.
Oh, you
whatever.
took the slow train as well. So. It's cheaper.
I didn't know there was a different. That might be why. Anyway, I wasn't paying attention. I just chose cheapest on train.
Yeah.
Line. Anyway,
Slow train.
anyway, so I'm on this train, and you know it's pretty long. I've mostly got music in for most of it. I've got a book I can read. I've got some work I can do, but sometimes I just pause the music, and even if it's 60 seconds, to just focus on the breath. And in a way that you are kind of doing something, but the reason why the breath is often is used in so much meditation is because it's the only thing you can't not do. And through it, we can therefore access space.
Yeah.
And the reason space is interesting is because when you get used to giving yourself space, you realize that there is space. And if there is space, you can do whatever you want with it to an extent. So like these little micro things to build yourself up, it just might be an interesting thing to do. It's like, I've got friends who, it's some slight TMI, they can't not take their phone with them into the bathroom.
Yeah, I have the same
and I've never taken my phone with me.
I also don't.
To me, it's like germs. So it's like,
yeah, I think from the germs point of view, like it'll be like in my coat pocket or something, but like I won't like be like.
So that's the thing. For then that exact moment, in the same way that you can be in the bathroom, like without needing to do anything, same thing while you're eating, same thing while you're like going on a walk. And even if it's just for a little bit, for like, start with 60 seconds.
I feel another one
happens.
that I've tried to do is when I'm brushing my teeth. Because
Yes,
in
that's
the morning,
a great time.
it's such like it's just another thing I have to do and like going through the motions.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, actually having that time with yourself. And I do want to caveat by saying that when I was unwell, a lot of people sold meditation to me as like the cure. And I don't think that's entirely true.
I don't think that's true either. I've done spent a lot of time trying to understand meditation. I think it gets thrown around a lot now. So even saying it, mindfulness isn't necessarily meditation.
Okay.
Mindfulness is an aspect of some meditations.
Okay, so then...
Which is like a nuance here, perhaps, yeah.
Okay, so then to rephrase, mindfulness was thrown around like it was the cure for me. And for ages, I had such I was like, mindfulness? No. Like, just no, because I was so unwell. I was screaming for help, and you were telling me to be mindful.
No, that's not helpful. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, absolutely.
And it just made me so angry because I don't think anything on its own is a robust enough solution to these such complex, multifaceted problems. Just medication or just therapy or just mindfulness. None of these things work in isolation, just like your mental health doesn't work in isolation.
Yeah, I think this is a marketing problem. We live being in the capitalist society. It's like, 100%. Here's my one solution to everything. Yeah. Boom, buy it. And you don't need to do anything else. And that's part of selling it. Exactly. And then you realize it's not the whole picture. So I need to buy like 5 different things. Exactly. And it serves the producer, but it doesn't serve the consumer. So I totally get that. And, you know, I think it's kind of part of that whole toxic positivity thing of like, but that I also think that was a section of thankfully very short section of our journey in the West with meditation, because we've lost meditation. All meditation for a long time in the West was prayer. Yeah. And so now we're elevating into a time where that isn't the whole picture for everyone. A lot of people that doesn't resonate with, but in a lot of traditions in other parts of the world, who have some very deep spiritual practices that aren't considered religious or their meditation. And the way the West kind of got introduced to meditation was through mindfulness. I think it was like the super watered down linear version, but very rightly, a lot of people realized that it's not the whole picture. Unfortunately, what that does is the pendulum starts to swing, and that creates backlash. The important thing, which it sounds like you've done, is to realize it's not the whole picture. Yeah. Therefore, this might be really useful in its place.
Yeah. And I think, there's great apps out there. Like, Headspace is something that I dip in and out of occasionally. When I'm feeling particularly overwhelmed, I like to bookend my day with like anything mindfulness meditation, I have a thing about the voice of the person. If I don't like the voice of the person, I can't do it. Like,
Totally understand.
very specific.
I actually think that's a very valid. That's
So
very
specific.
valid.
So like, there's loads of them that I'm just like, nope, absolutely not. But the ones that I do have, I find myself going back to because they work and they help. Especially, I mean, the morning ones are difficult because I end up just falling asleep again. But the evening ones I find really kind of, and I don't do it all the time. I haven't done it in ages. But in times of like real stress, it's something that I have in like my toolbox of things that I can rely on to go back and kind of dip in and out of. And I think that's what works for me, just changing it up a lot. Also, with a neurodivergent brain, I can't do keep doing one thing for a long amount of time because I get bored of it. But just having these different tools that I can kind of pick and choose and rotate from really helps in terms of making my life easier for myself. And I have no shame in doing that anymore.
Good.
And I think it's really important to make your life as easy for you as you can. It doesn't matter if someone looks at it and it's like, oh, that's so much effort and that would make my day 10 times harder. If it makes your day easier, go for it.
Yeah. Not everything that is descriptive is prescriptive.
Yeah, exactly.
With a lot of the work you do, it's a lot of activism, whether it's policy or it's just generally like getting involved in youth organizations. And I've started to notice in such a polarizing world, activism can be a funny word for some people.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you?
Good question. I think it means to stand up for your beliefs and your values, however that may look. I don't think everyone, in fact, not everyone who either experiences a life-changing trauma or like suffers with their mental health or has a life-changing diagnosis or like some kind of event, not everyone can kind of turn it into this amazing like story of how it made them and that's how they started changing the world. Like, sometimes you have to take that step back. It doesn't mean you're any less of an activist. You can be an activist in your own right, in your own life, whatever that word means for you, whether you're advocating for yourself in spaces like healthcare, in spaces where you're dismissed or not believed, to advocating for other people, to standing up for what you believe in, to talking about stuff, spreading the word, challenging yourself, challenging other people. Like, for me, activism is on one thing and it's not this narrow definition that people think it is. For me, it's something much broader.
I think that's really powerful, actually, because when that's the case, you can make it what it is for you. You can make it your thing and use whatever is most powerful. We who am I saying when I say we? I want to just throw that word around. There is a big chunk of people on the internet where I live in the echo chamber of my beliefs and I follow some activists who are in line with what those beliefs are. And then that reinforces the echo chamber. I've noticed some activists, well, that echo chamber creates a couple of problems. There's one activist I'm familiar with, is like a climate activist, but they aren't vegan. And so they get like shit on for that by that community, which feels really unhelpful to me from my perspective personally. Where I'm like, well, but is this a conversation? Also, they're a whole human. Maybe that doesn't work for them. Maybe, they don't agree, but it doesn't make the issue that they care about any less relevant or them less knowledgeable about, but that nuance disappears. That's within that echo chamber. Then, because when you're outside of it, if you disagree, now we're two totally different big bubbles of disagreement. And then so people who don't like activists for a different thing, or if there's a strong enough, really angry portion of the internet, or at least they're very loud, however big it is, it's very loud, that's like, activists are just trying to change the status quo, and I don't like that. And so then activism becomes a dirty word for those people. And so at some point, the word starts to lose some of its meaning.
Yeah, I think this is also something that I've grappled with a lot. But the other day, my mom was like, do you think you should be introducing yourself as an award-winning activist and speaker? She was like, isn't that a bit like bigging yourself up? And then I started thinking like, oh, maybe I shouldn't. But also, what does that word mean to me? And what are the other contexts in which people can perceive that? And is that also my responsibility of how other people perceive it? And can I take ownership of my achievements in a way that doesn't make me sound like a mean person? Trying to be PJ.
You don't have to be. I swear a whole bunch, so it's okay.
And yeah, just this kind of real thing that I'm currently grappling with. Like when people are like, oh, introduce yourself and what you do. I don't know. I have no idea. Also, and then there's this other word that people throw around, which is change maker. I don't know how I feel about that word either. Because change can be on any scale.
This is such a good point. It became a label, and the label has an implied meaning.
Kind of like influencer.
Yes, I totally agree. This is really interesting to me, actually, because I've noticed that we have so many words in like Urban Dictionary, so to speak, whether it's actually Urban Dictionary or just generally, where we think we have all agreed on a definition and we haven't. It's like, what's the definition of woke? The people
depends on who you ask.
Exactly, that's my point. Until we have an agreed definition, we might be talking about two totally different things, and that just isn't helpful. And that's kind of my point. It's like, I wonder if activism is actually one of those words. Changemaker is definitely one of those. Like, how vague? Like, it's really unhelpful, actually. This is so important. Such important things to think about. What labels do we use? What labels do we cast onto others? Do we use for ourselves? And I think you're so right to question those things.
Yeah, and also where that sits with me and how I feel about these terms. And that's something I'm still kind of trying to figure out. Yeah, I don't really know what I want to be known as yet.
Maybe you don't need to.
Yeah.
It's a bit like when you're told to choose your GCSEs.
Yeah.
You're like, do I really need to have my whole life planned out at this age? It's a bit stupid. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like
absolutely.
you're in the process of discovering that. And again, the journey is the destination. So you are right where you need to be in figuring that out. And when you have your answers, will be the right time to have your answers because you'll have them then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I like that.
This has been really cool. We've gone in a bunch of different directions I didn't expect.
Yeah,
but I love
honestly,
that.
if someone was to draw a diagram of our conversation, it would just be like...
I've had way worse, don't worry. I've had much worse. And what I've noticed is I'm like, where is that conversation gone? And then when I listen back to it, I'm like, actually, this has been really useful for other people. When you're on the outside, you don't know what to, my notes or my bullet points are, this is how I write speeches. It's like, I just have some bullet points. I'm like, if these end up being useful when I'm there, I'll just do it. And sometimes I'm not. As we start to bring the conversation to a close, reflecting on some of these things, from your perspective, what does good leadership look like? And maybe even a slightly different reframe on that question is, what does it mean to you to be a leader? Because again, in the same way that anyone can be a change maker, I believe anyone can be a leader, and it's just about, scale and context for you.
Okay. This is actually a skill that I would like to work on in terms of my own personal development and like leadership, because I think it depends on who you ask. I feel like my mom would be like, oh yeah, she's a natural leader, because I'm quite outspoken and like I'm okay to take the steer with like to steer stuff, and like I'm fine with that. But on a deeper level, I think that makes me quite uncomfortable. I'm talking about myself to answer your question, which is not the question you asked, but I think what I'm trying to say is I also don't know what that looks like for me, and it's something that I'm really interested to explore. I think I do agree with what you're saying, that I think anyone can be a leader. Not everyone has to be a leader, but everyone can be a leader. And I think it's about listening to other people, specifically the people whose voices are not heard. And this is another point that everyone says, oh, like people who, like, no, like everyone has a voice. It's just some people talk over others, or there's certain barriers which mean that someone's voice doesn't get heard, but they're not voiceless. So I think it's about giving the space and the platform and encouraging the people who are not heard as often to use their voice, and empowering them to be able to do that and feel comfortable to do that. I don't know. There's lots of ideas of like leaders being like ruthless and like making difficult decisions. I don't know if that. I feel like that simplifies it too much. I feel like leaders have to be empathetic, and like they have to, they have to be empathetic. I think that's a big quality of leadership, just listening to others around you, taking on. Okay, I'm rambling. The answer is I don't know. I think in different contexts to different things, it means different. It can be different things. I'm also still trying to figure it out.
Which, by nature of being empathetic, or by the nature of being empathetic, that demands that it shows up differently in different contexts. Which is why there isn't going to be one definition.
Yeah.
So it almost like the fact that you don't know kind of is part of the answer, is because there isn't one answer. That's why I like asking this to everyone, is because, and I ask it to so many people just in life in general, I want as many perspectives about this as possible, because I'm trying to figure out how we paint a holistic picture of what it means to be a leader. Period. How do you know if you're in the presence of someone who's being a great leader, regardless of their position? You meet a random person on the street and go, this person has led me through a great conversation, or whatever. And it's just, it can show up in all these little ways. There isn't one answer. There is a multi-dimensional picture that needs to be built, which is one of the things I'm trying to see if this show is right to do. So
I'm interested
really
to hear what you find out, because I'm like also like having dipped my toe into the corporate world. There's so many like project managers and directors and all of these terms going around, and I'm just trying to figure out what it all means, what it means to me, and where I sit in all of it, and whether I actually want to be one of these people, or whether I'm happy to just let them do their thing. And yeah.
From where I've currently gotten to, and I've written about this a whole bunch. So I have some distilled thoughts and some evolving undistilled thoughts. And it's like, there's a difference between being a leader and someone in a leadership position. And as a result, we can all be more of the leader that we are, take a lead in our own life, and thus be a leader in whatever our corner is. Now, those most commonly manifest in a few ways. Politicians and entrepreneurs are the two most common that I see.
Yeah.
You also have leaders that are in leadership positions in companies, but there's a difference between leadership and management. So a manager might need to use leadership skills, but are they being a leader? That depends on how they show up as a person, not just the skills or the title. So that's why it gets a bit multidimensional. That's why this like idea of, I don't know, the person who made your coffee at the cafe could be a great leader in the ways that they show up. Maybe they're the one running the show behind the scenes that you just don't know because the cafe feels so well run, and then they go home and they're leading their family or whatever. It's not always a straightforward picture.
Yeah.
We have very high profile politicians, and we have these like rock star entrepreneurs like the Elon Musks and Jeff Bezoses of the world, where it's like we're just seeing them all the time, and so we think that's what being a leader is, but that's just a physical manifestation.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah.
That's one place I've gotten to. Anyway, we've gone on a bunch of different things.
Yeah, sorry.
Wrapping this up, no, I love it. Wrapping this up, I've got an ending question I like to ask everyone. The show is called Lost and Searching.
Ooh.
And so, Sophia, I'd love to know, is there anything in life, are there any answers in life that you know you are still searching for?
Oh, so many.
I get that like half the time, and I'm like, so what's the biggest one?
Oh, that's such a hard one. Probably something to do with where am I supposed to end up? And what does success and like making it look like for me? Because there's so many things it could be, and I think it's important to acknowledge the different parts of you. Part of me wants to like live in a forest and like own like 15 cats and just have my own little life, and part of me wants to like set up a company and be like flying around and doing business with important people. Like, all of these different elements exist within me, and I want to know how they will either merge or how they will interact to be what is meant for me. And I'm excited, a little bit scared, but I'm excited. So, and I feel like it's always just going to be a journey. I feel specifically in the era that we live in, it's not just, you don't just like start one job and stay in that career for the rest of your life. And I think I would be quite happy to try different things and reinvent myself at like 40 or something like that.
Why not?
Exactly.
I do think we have that freedom, and you know that's something we're really privileged to have now. You know, and that's not to be positive or negative about it so much, it's just to appreciate it, right? Absolutely. Sometimes we construct something as like an option A and an option B, and often there's like an option C, which is like a combination of all of the above. By asking the question, you are demanding your unconscious mind helps you find an answer. And over time, therefore, I'm pretty confident you will. So I'm excited for you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate you. It's really early days, so I'm trying to figure out a bunch of stuff, but I just have so much appreciation for the people who have, in these earlier episodes, given me their time and shared so much with all of us. And being honest and being vulnerable, I appreciate it.
It's all about the journey.
There you go.
There you go.
Full stop.
Woohoo.